Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and tonight I have a special guest instead of Aaron Quinn, who is normally beside me and is admittedly not the fantasy expert that we need for this show. We figured we'd bring in a pinch hitter, and I am bringing in none other than Michelle Magdziuk from BallBlast Football. Michelle, how are we doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Really excited here. I know that we're right in kind of the tail end of that fantasy draft phase. A lot of people just had their big draft, and there's a couple people that maybe weren't sure if there was going to be football, weren't sure what we were going to do, and are now finally cramming and like, oh man, I probably should figure out what the heck's going on here. Let's see if you can help them get caught up tonight.
And you know what? They're probably better off with all the news we've had lately, with Kaiir maybe holding out, with Mixon getting his extension, with Fournette getting cut. So much news in the last couple of days. Hopefully people did hold off on their drafts.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was out there grilling some burgers for dinner earlier tonight. My neighbor walked over. He's like, hey, I have the fourth pick tonight. Do you think I should take Kamara, or is it too scary? Who should I go? So we debated back and forth. We'll get to that in a minute. I'll let you know what advice I gave him. We'll get to that. But we'll start out with a little bit of the Bills side of things, and let's start right with the quarterbacks. I think that it's, obviously there's a lot of different strategies around there, depending if you're playing in a regular standard one quarterback league. Super flex leagues are getting a lot more exciting and popular nowadays. Let's start with Josh Allen. Where do you see him as a fantasy asset? I know his running game has really boosted a lot of that with the, the passing not caught up to where it needs to be yet. Where do you see him coming into this year?
So I still have him as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. He was the quarterback 6 last year. Now, he did play a full 16 games. That kind of skews things. He was actually the quarterback 11 in fantasy points per game. That's kind of how he was all year long. He didn't win you too many games, but luckily he didn't lose you too many games either. He was very consistent, but he didn't have that high ceiling you were hoping for because the passing yards and passing touchdowns weren't there. No, I think those will go up this year with Stephon Diggs and, all of his new weapons. But I do expect his rushing touchdowns to go down a bit, which is fair. I mean, 8 and 9 touchdowns on the ground the last 2 years. And 4 of his rushing touchdowns last year came after the team gave Frank Gore multiple opportunities at the 1 and 2 yard line. And then they had to go to Josh Allen on 3rd or 4th down. So I do expect Frank Gore to be better in that situation, or not Frank Gore, sorry, Zach Moss, my boy Zach Moss, to be better in that situation. And Josh Allen's rushing touchdowns might come down a bit. I still expect his rushing numbers to be there, though, and I expect his passing touchdown to increase.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair trade-off, and it's going to be interesting to see how much of that do we see, and is it an equal offset? That seeing the overall touchdowns last year, do we see that come up in consistent value? So if you're in a league where touchdowns are all 6 points no matter what, maybe that balances out. Yeah. If you're in a league where it's 4 points for passing touchdowns and 6 for rushing, each one that trades off in passing might offset and not net out the same amount of points. So it'll be interesting there. For the non-Josh Allen quarterbacks who, sorry for them that they're not Josh Allen, who are some of the guys that maybe you like more than the consensus? Everybody loves Mahomes. Everybody loves Lamar Jackson. Who are some of the guys that you think maybe are going to outproduce their average draft position?
Yeah, quarterback that's going super, super late in drafts is Gardner Minshew. I think with that team, how it is right now, he's going to have to pass the ball 600 plus times. They really don't have a running back they can lean on now with Fournette gone. I like his weapons good enough. Like Chris Thompson can be that receiving threat as a running back. DJ Chark is one of my favorite wide receivers going into this year. Laviska Shenault going into his second year or his first year, but as a second round draft pick. So he has decent weapons. Their defense, though, is so bad, too. Like I said, I just think he's going to have to pass the ball so much. He has the rushing ability, too, to give him that floor. And he's going so late in his schedule. If you look at it in the beginning of the season, is beautiful. And that's what I'm looking at when I'm drafting a late round quarterback, is that they have the easy schedule to begin with. Because if they don't, then there's no point to draft them, because you don't want to draft more than one quarterback usually. And you need that early season schedule to be nice. So Gardner Minshew and Cam Newton are 2 guys I like later on because of that schedule, because of that rushing ability. And, the overall team's not looking too great for either one.
Yeah, and obviously, a lot of people get into the overall football dynamic in quarterback play, but in fantasy, the garbage stats count just the same. And if you're,
Exactly.
the Blake Bortles seasons, the other ones where it's ugly, but it still counts. This still
Garbage
racks
time.
up. Yeah.
Garbage time. You gotta love it.
Well, and so I was in a league earlier that, we were going back and forth, and the guy was asking, hey, how long should I wait? And I said, we just had everybody drafted a quarterback. 3 more backups went, and quarterback 15, 16, 17, 18 was Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, Baker Mayfield. And I'm like, they could still be pretty good. Like, you can wait a long time on a quarterback nowadays. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and Ben's a guy I've been eyeing as well. He looks great so far in practice. His elbow looks to be healthy. So he's a guy I've been eyeing too later on in drafts.
A lot of guys are chiming in that they'd love to see Josh Allen run a little bit less.
Yeah.
So that brings us to here. And for anyone who's not following Michelle, she's on Twitter at BallBlast. BallBlast Football is that you can find the website at ballblastfootball.com. You can find them at BallBlast FB. Anyone who isn't following Michelle will quickly learn that she's a fan of someone that you guys are a big fan of. You commented slightly on it earlier, but why do you think that Josh Allen's touchdowns may come down a little bit this year in the running back department?
Zach Moss is my favorite rookie running back. I am so excited for him. I loved him before the draft. And what stinks is that Devin Singletary is top 5 favorite running back of mine to watch and to root for. And I had him, last offseason, I was yelling for Devin Singletary in fantasy. But then, the Bills went and drafted Zach Moss on me as well. So now I have to choose a side. And I chose Zach Moss, and I do think he's going to be the goal line back. I mean, he's 200 pounds heavier. They wouldn't give Devin Singletary those carries last year, even though Frank Gore was abysmal at getting into the end zone. So I do think those all go to Zach Moss. I think he's a lot more efficient down there compared to Frank Gore, and Josh Allen's touchdowns will then come down in regards to rushing.
Well, I think your point that I didn't even realize it or connect it, but now that you say that many of Josh's touchdowns were after failed goal line attempts by Frank Gore. If Zach Moss punches those in, you never get to that point where Josh needs to run it in. That's really interesting to look at of where it is. And there's been a lot of reports out. Joe Buscaglia, who writes
Josh Allen down there.
Yeah, Joe Buscaglia, who writes for The Athletic, had commented that he thinks there's a reasonable possibility there are games where Zach Moss gets more carries, and that it's a scenario where, I anticipate it being kind of 60-40 Devin Singletary, but I think there's games where if it's against maybe week 1 against the Jets, if that game gets out of hand in the second half, you could easily see Zach Moss being the one that milks away those carries and really takes the larger end of the share.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully the Bills are leading a lot this year.
Yeah, let's hope so.
And just letting Zach Moss take care of it, win the game for you, give him 20 plus carries. Let's do it.
So you had commented, let's start with maybe some of the news that's broken here. I know there was potential for 3 big-time running back holdouts. You had Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's contract got extended today, so anybody who's out there, that's one that you can feel a little bit more comfortable, maybe tail end of round 1. If you have a draft coming up in the next couple days, how do you feel about guys like Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook?
If I can look elsewhere besides those 2, I probably will. So if you're stuck there at the number 4 pick and you had CMC and Barkley and Zeke go, that's kind of a tough place to be because Kaiir would easily be my number 4 before this. Now he's saying he's going to practice tomorrow, right? He's saying he never threatened to hold out. Now it's coming out that he had an epidural shot, and it seems like Twitter is going back and forth between, is that normal or is that not normal?
It's not a term I hear thrown around a lot with football players. My wife had one when she had our kids.
But it seems like some guys are like, oh, this is so normal. And then others are like, no, this isn't. So I don't know which way to go. I'm not an injury person. So I don't know if that's normal or not. Yeah. I still want to take Alvin Kamara. I actually have him as my second highest projected running back in terms of points this year. But if I'm in a draft right now, I have to go with Barkley or Zeke because they're safer. And then I would consider Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Derrick Henry above them just right now because of the holdout situation.
It's funny. So when I commented earlier about sitting out in my driveway grilling, that's what I told my neighbor. I said, if he gets to me and I'm at pick 4 right now, there's a chance that, you end up finding out that Cook gets extended or Kamara gets extended and everything's fine. But right now, I'd take Clyde Edwards-Helaire because I feel more comfortable that he's the centerpiece of one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in football, and that he's going to be a guy that I'm not going to feel bad about, afterwards. Whereas if you tank your number 4 overall pick and you find out that it's a Le'Veon Bell situation and he's out all season, it doesn't write off your whole season, but it's tough. That's a big hole to dig out of.
The only thing you have to be scared about is that, there was news that came out earlier that Kansas City might be interested in signing Fournette if they can have the right deal. That would really hurt Clyde Edwards, obviously.
Yeah.
But then, if Philly did it, there's a lot of running backs that Fournette could possibly hurt. And that just makes me nervous. But hopefully he goes to a team like Washington or something where he's not hurting anyone really important.
Yeah, you've seen some things thrown out there. Obviously, Chicago with the David Montgomery situation. I've heard Tampa thrown out there that you could see maybe a situation there. Washington, it's, nobody's picking Adrian Peterson already where he is. That'd be interesting. The biggest fantasy irony will be everyone hated Leonard Fournette. He'll go to Kansas City and then have some amazingly efficient season, and everyone will try to back their way into saying, no, I always believed in him. So any later round guys, handcuffs, people that you like a little bit more than consensus, you tell the guys to watch out for?
Yeah. So if I'm thinking right now, Latavius Murray, right? He's someone that you have to keep an eye on with Kaiir maybe holding out, or with his epidural, maybe he's a little bit, his knee isn't totally recovered from last year. We saw Latavius Murray ball out last year when Kaiir missed time. I think he was a running back 2 and the running back 3 during those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So he's someone to definitely keep an eye on. I don't know how late we're talking here, but I do think Chris Thompson's a decent option now, and just in full PPR leagues, now that Fournette is gone. Fournette had 100 targets last year and he wasn't even efficient in the receiving game. And that is where Chris Thompson excels. So we've seen running backs like Duke Johnson, like Tariq Cohen, Eckler last year. They don't need a ton of carries as long as they get the targets. And I could see Chris Thompson getting 100 targets in that offense. So he's someone to target a little bit later. Same thing with a guy like Nyheim Hines, kind of the same situation. Philip Rivers loves the running back position.
Austin Eckler last year.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I really like Jonathan Taylor, so I hope that Nyheim Hines isn't something, but he probably will steal those away from Taylor and make us all frustrated.
It's funny you say that. I've heard some interesting reports coming out of Colts camp that Marlon Mack is getting some run in that role too, catching a lot of balls coming out of there, which doesn't really fit his profile or what he's done so far. And they have Hines, but that would be an interesting pivot if they try to say, hey, we know we have a talent here. We drafted Taylor for that role that kind of replaces Mack. I'm really curious to see where that nets out between Mack and Hines, because I agree. Philip Rivers has shown that propensity for that kind of role.
Yep. Yeah, he's not a scrambler. So when he's in trouble, he dumps it off to his running back, which is great. But now that we have 3 running backs in this backfield that can handle that, I think it might be a headache to start the season. Yeah,
it'll be interesting. Okay, switching over to wide receiver, I think that this is something that Bills fans are just not prepared for. We go back to the first year of Sean McDermott, the Bills starting wide receivers. You had Andre Holmes, you had Jeremy Curley, you had, just really, all pro talents. And now coming forward 3 years, the Bills have Stephon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley, now the hype train of Gabe Davis in training camp.
Oh, I know.
What are some of your thoughts on let's assume Josh Allen does have a solid season, takes a step forward in passing. Where do you see some of these guys netting out and maybe some of the target share shaking out with the talent that the Bills have?
It seems like during camp, this whole training camp, they really wanted to make Stephon Diggs the focal point of this offense, which is great. But I do think they might all hurt each other in fantasy because they're all really talented wide receivers, which is a great thing for the Bills, not a great thing for fantasy. Stephon Diggs last year had 94 targets. He produced as a receiver because he's had 1,100 receiving yards.
17 yards a catch.
Yeah, exactly. But he usually averages around 11 to 13 yards per catch. So last year was an outlier season for him. And I just think with the Bills offense, it's going to be a lot of the same where they do run the ball a lot. And I don't know if Stephon Diggs is going to see over 110 targets.
Yeah.
And he's going to need those yards per reception to stay up. And he's going to have to score touchdowns for him to be a consistent wide receiver in fantasy, which he's never really been. Even with Minnesota, he has his boom games and then he kind of disappears. So I've never loved him for fantasy. I think he's one of the most talented wide receivers in the league, though. So great pickup for the Bills, not touching him in fantasy.
Yeah, so the practice battles between him and Trey White have been phenomenal. It's been so fun to watch. Stephon Diggs got the better of him today on a really nice release, beautifully arced deep ball for a touchdown to Diggs. And your target range is right where I see it as well. I know a lot of folks that listen to Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, and we projected about the same thing. I think you cobbled together, Zay Jones is on the team earlier, Robert Foster, Isaiah McKenzie, Duke Williams. There's a lot of targets there that got thrown around that I think are going to be consolidated. I think that you can have all three of Diggs, Brown, and Beasley between 90 and 110 targets, but I'd be shocked if Diggs gets more than 115. I think that's the range, and that's not terrible. That is a playable receiver, but it's not, you see some of those guys, when you're the only guy like Allen Robinson in a receiving core, you're the only guy like DeAndre Hopkins used to be. There's just such a buoy when you're getting 150 targets in a season.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's huge for that kind of production. So yeah, I agree. I think that we're going to see some big games from all of them. I think that Diggs will end up the number one receiver production-wise out of the group. I'd be surprised if you get consistent production the way that even John Brown was. John Brown was a consistent wide receiver too last year, getting catches, the whole time.
I loved him so much last year. John
Brown,
Brown,
the dollar auction leagues.
John Brown was my sleeper all last offseason. I kept yelling at everyone to go draft John Brown, and he was fantastic. And that's one of my fears with Diggs as well. John Brown's not just disappearing, right?
Correct.
Allen and him built this connection. This is going to get John Brown even more open and have more space. Hopefully, they can connect more down the field. If I'm going to take a shot on one of these guys, I'm going to take John Brown in the 12th round instead of Diggs in the 5th.
And honestly, I think that you could see two different 68 catch and 975 yards, 6 touchdown seasons, which could have games where one of them have 5 for 120 and a touchdown and is great, but then you could also have 4 for 43 and nothing else. And
yeah, they might be better for best ball. Maybe leave them.
There you go. Yeah. So now outside of the Bills, there are some other receivers in the NFL. Who are some guys that you like that are maybe coming in above consensus for your rates?
So I know I already talked about Jacksonville, but I need to talk about them one more time because I cannot not mention DJ Chark. I have him as my wide receiver 8.
Wow.
Wide receiver 8.
Wow.
And that might sound crazy, but he was only healthy from weeks 1 through 14, right? And that's a massive part of the season. He hurt his ankle pretty bad and was in a walking boot on a scooter after the week 14 game. Guess where he was from weeks 1 through 14? He was a wide receiver 8. That's a massive part of the season. He missed a game and then he was injured and tried to play through it. And you could definitely see he struggled and his stats struggled. So he fell all the way from the wide receiver 8 to the wide receiver 17 by the end of the year. Like you're saying, you're looking for a guy that has little competition in an offense. Who else are you giving 140, 150 targets to in that offense when Gardner Minshew is going to have to throw the ball a ton? They don't have a run game. They don't have a defense like the Bills do. I think DJ Chark is going to be a top tier wide receiver in this league starting this year. And then another guy in that very similar is Terry McLaurin, a very similar situation. Nobody else in that offense is going to demand targets like Terry McLaurin will. You saw him dominate last year as a rookie. And again, the defense is going to be that great. They're going to have to throw a lot. Their run game's not that stellar. So I'm excited for both of those wide receivers. I have them both in my top 10.
That's awesome. I'm really shocked. My co-host is normally right in here. He was an enormous Terry McLaurin fan coming out in the draft. So I'm waiting for him to chime in here to be able to show that you're talking about him. Oh, here he comes. It's something that I think that it's hard for some of those guys. You've seen those seasons in the past, and I mentioned Allen Robinson. You've seen some of those years where it's really easy and it's not always fun to watch. They can have games where, going into midway through the fourth quarter, it's 3 catches for 38 yards. Like, oh man. And then you look back, wait, how the heck did it end up 6 for 150 and a touchdown? And it's that garbage time that it just adds up when you're on those teams that are passing a ton. We didn't mention him earlier, but I can see some similar situations from Dwayne Haskins. I think that he might get a chance this year to have some of those garbage stats, and not in a standard format, but if you're in a 2-quarterback league or a super flex league, he might have some garbage stats without how terrible that season's going to be.
Safer like rushing floor.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking for those later round quarterbacks, I am looking for that safer rushing floor, and he doesn't give it to me. But you're right. I mean, they're going to have to pass to stay in the game. So he could have some sneaky value in a 2-quarterback league.
So now moving into the next position, this gets kind of tough here with tight ends in that it's one of the top heaviest positions in fantasy, and just a huge drop off after the first 2 guys. But once you get past the first 3 or 4, I don't Dawson is in that phase of his career yet. I think that all the other mouths, especially in the receivers, really limit what his upside is. But what are your thoughts on the future of somebody like Dawson Knox as a talent, and maybe the capability he could have going into the future, maybe in a dynasty league, something like that?
Yeah, Dawson Knox looked good out there. He did have a lot of drops. Now, when I'm looking for breakout tight ends, I'm looking for an offense that desperately needs more pass catchers, and that's the exact opposite of what we have in the Bills offense, which you did bring up. So I can't think about Knox as anyone that I would draft or try to keep for dynasty anytime soon, because you would expect Diggs and Brown and Beasley to be here for a bit. And then you have Gabe Davis, who, is shining, and he should be there for a while too.
Yeah, might press some 4 receiver sets instead of the 11.
Yeah, I can't see Knox breaking out in this offense. He'll have some games. Like, I'm sure he's a talented young tight end, but he's never going to be, at least in the next couple of years, a guy that you can really rely on, because they don't need him. Like, they're not going to shovel him targets, because that's not what this offense is about. They don't need that.
So obviously, George Kittle and Travis Kelce are just unbelievable talents, and guys who are going to go, sometimes second, third round, depending on what kind of league you're in. Last year, it was, trying to figure out who was next, and it was always Zach Ertz, and guys like Darren Waller exploded onto the scene. Now he's going in that range. Who are maybe some guys you could see being this year's Darren Waller that could come out of nowhere?
What's disappointing about today is that I've been really high on Chris Herndon, right? And then who knows what is going on with him? He has chest tightness. I don't really know what that means. And he left practice and came back and then left again. I'm going to still hold out hope, even though now, thinking back to last year, thinking about all those injuries, this kind of creeps in your head. Hopefully he can just play this season. But when you're talking about those breakouts, like I just said, Darren Waller broke out last year because the Raiders offense needed him. Like, they had nobody else to pass the ball to. That's kind of what we have right now with the Jets. And you've heard that Darnold and Herndon have had this great connection throughout camp so far. I mean, Perriman's hurt. Mims is hurt. They only have Crowder, basically. They signed Dante Moncrief. Have fun with that. So I'm really excited to see Chris Herndon, and I think he can be the next Darren Waller. We just need him to be healthy. And then another guy like that is Mike Gesicki. He ran so many routes last year, and he didn't do a whole lot with it. That's what kind of makes me nervous. But another offense that desperately needs more pass catchers, especially if Devontae Parker's injury is more serious than we think. But they have Parker and Preston Williams and nothing else. So I think Mike Gesicki could be a breakout this year.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting case there. Bodot here is commenting on Irv Smith. I think that's interesting to see how they use that with Kevin Stefanski moving to Cleveland. Do they stick with as much of the 2 tight end sets there? I think Smith has a really bright future. I was curious if Kyle Rudolph was going to remain on the team there with some of their contract situations.
For Irv Smith to, for me to feel better about him in fantasy, I really wish Kyle Rudolph wasn't there anymore, because Kyle Rudolph is going to be used. He's the vet. He's trusted. I do think Irv Smith is way more talented right now in this period of their careers. So I hope he breaks out. He's not a guy I've been targeting late in my drafts. I do like him more for dynasty than I do for redraft 2020.
What are your thoughts on some of the guys who moved around into teams and that, every year somebody convinces themselves this is the year Tyler Eifert's going to stay healthy, or is Eric Ebron going to catch touchdowns from Ben Roethlisberger this year? Maybe some of those later round guys you missed on, some of the early ones you waited too long and missed out on them. Do you think any of those guys could produce in their new situation? Maybe even Rob Gronkowski in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I mean, you would like to think Eifert because, again, offense that needs somebody. But, I mean, you can't trust him, right? It's been so long since he's actually been a thing, since he can stay healthy. Eric Ebron, I always say never draft Steelers tight ends. I'm a massive Steeler fan. That's my team. Never draft Steelers tight ends.
I convinced myself with Vance McDonald last year and got bit.
No, I told everyone last year no. But I do think Eric Ebron, I mean, the only way he is successful is if he gets 8 to 10 touchdowns. Yeah. I mean, that's the only way he's usable, because I don't think he gets all those targets or yards. And that could possibly happen, right? He can be that target hog in the end zone. We'll see. That's never something I want to rely on. One guy that changed teams, but he's going a bit earlier in drafts, is Hayden Hurst. I love him this year. So if I miss out on those top tier guys, or if I'm just waiting, I am happy with Hayden Hurst later in the draft. I think Austin Hooper is a good talent, but I think it's more about the situation of the Atlanta offense. And the Dirk Cutter offense always uses tight ends. Doesn't matter who they were. They always see 70 plus targets. I think Hayden Hurst is actually a good talent. He's just not as good as Mark Andrews for the Ravens offense. So I'm pretty excited about Hayden Hurst this year.
Yeah, Bills fans will remember him. They were right in the middle of the game, and he broke on a busted coverage for a freaking 70-yard touchdown to start the second half against the Bills. It was very frustrating to watch. But they saw his talent on full display. Switching in, we can talk a little bit about specific players, but let's start a little bit on the kicker defense side. We'll start with the Bills and talk a little bit about where they're at, but maybe some strategy on, like, what do you look for? I always look for later bye weeks, so I don't have to drop a guy early on, or early easy schedules, maybe some things like that. So first we'll start on the kicker side. Do you think that the Bills have the kind of offense where Tyler Bass could offer value? What are the kind of offenses you look for to invest in for a kicker?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking for a high-powered offense that's scoring a lot of points. I do like dome kickers. So, yeah, the Bills probably wouldn't be the type of kicker I'm looking for, especially with him being a rookie. Like, I'm not going to trust that. Now, I'm not going to give very good advice for kickers. I don't play in a lot of league with kickers. We've got them out of here. Good and if I do, it's the last round. I wait to take a kicker till the very last round. I just take really anybody. I like the Arizona kicker because Zane Gonzalez, because they had trouble last year scoring when they got close to the goal line. That's great. An offense that can move the ball but struggles in the red zone. That's a perfect kicker to get, especially in warm weather in Arizona. So, I'm definitely looking at, warm weather places, domes, offenses that are, move the ball a lot. I guess I don't even care so much if they score, but offenses that have good pieces that will be moving the ball to get them into that position to score those field goals.
Yeah, I didn't realize Greg Zuerlein had signed with Dallas until recently. I was like, oh, well, that's indoors and a pretty good offense, and he can kick the ball a mile. I'll pick him.
Yeah, that's a good pick.
Yeah, they checked a lot of the boxes there.
Yeah.
So I know less so with kicker. A lot of leagues are still maintaining defense as a function there. What are some of the things you look for in a defense? In obviously some of the things like turnovers are not as predictable as what they are. Maybe sacks are a little bit more of an element that carries over year to year. What are things you look for when you're drafting a defense? Is it schedule heavy, or is it more on the talent side?
It's definitely schedule heavy. All I care about is those first 4 games, because again, I'm waiting until the second to last round. So it goes defense and then kicker. So all of those top tier defenses are already going to be drafted. So the Bills, the Steelers, the Patriots. But again, they're only being drafted is because they were good the year before in fantasy. And a lot of the times that changes. So I would never waste an earlier pick on a defense just because they're good the year before. Remember, the Steelers 2 years ago had the least amount of turnovers in their history. I'm pretty sure, at least in the latest 20 years of history. So, and then last year it flew back up to one of the highest in the league. So you can never predict those. I'm going off schedule, especially the first 2 weeks. Someone I'm really eyeing is the Chargers against Cincy week 1.
Yep. Yeah, and they have a couple nice games early on. The Bills actually do have a nice schedule opening up with the Jets in Miami. There's a couple that open up real nice, but then you have some other teams. Like I like the Browns defense this year. I like Myles Garrett, but they open with Baltimore. I'm not going to draft a team that I can't play week one. It's just impossible. I like Houston's defense. They open up with Kansas City. I can't draft a team that opens up with Kansas City.
Joe just made a really good point. It's week to week for him. And maybe if you get lucky and take Justin Tucker in that last round and you get him, like that's great. Sure. You can keep him and play him each week, and maybe he can be a difference maker. But for the defense, say you pick a Buffalo or a team, the Bears, and they have a hard game that week against a high-powered offense, you have to decide whether to keep them on your bench and have two defenses, which is just a waste of space, and you have to take someone else off your bench, or you have to play them and risk that. Like, that's too stressful for me. I would much rather stream defenses throughout the whole season. And it's a fun element. I like it.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of guys, we have a few of the regular Erics in here listening, and he's somebody who gets into the gambling side sometimes. There's a lot of elements you can look at there. I stream defenses straight off Vegas. Give me the lowest over under, give me a home team, and the biggest favorite. Give me those three things, whatever the lowest over under is, a home team that's the biggest favorite that's available on my waiver wire. I don't even care if they check those three boxes. It's going to work out more times than not that they're a favorite for a reason. I do like home teams on defense. I think that can help later on in the game. And the low over under, Vegas knows things that we don't know. So I trust their math.
It's going to be so interesting this year with no crowds to see like how defenses play. Like, I'm so interested to see if this helps offenses or if it hurts them, like what way it goes.
It's really interesting you say that, because I think people assume that it hurts and it helps the offense because you can hear everything now. You don't have the crowd noise. You don't have the false starts. You don't have the things. I've actually heard quite a few NFL players who are now analysts or podcasts say, you guys underestimate how much it's going to help them that they can crystal clear hear the communication from the offense and react now. And that before – they're drowned out by the fans as well, and they can't hear those things. And that you guys don't understand how helpful this is for defenses to hear all the offensive play calls and the checks and the audibles, and that now you're going to hear that every play. And by the second quarter, third quarter, you're going to pick up on things, and that there's things that we're not understanding. So I'm really curious to see who has defenses smart enough and experienced enough to do that.
Yeah, they're going to have to get creative, these offenses. They're not going to just be able to yell out the audibles because defenses are too smart for that. You're always going to have some veterans on the other side figuring it out. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. So before we wrap up here, we'll go into anything. And guys, if you guys are listening, have any questions here, we'll get to those questions for Michelle. If you guys have anything specific before we wrap up, what are some things strategy wise that you like to do? I know some people, get into zero RB and taking some of the other positions of receivers early. This year, a lot of people seem to think that receivers really deep and that you can wait and get them in the middle rounds and to stack up running backs early on. Are you somebody that waits on quarterback consistently to get somebody later, or hey, I'll go for the top 2 or 3 tight ends but then wait forever? What are some just overall strategy tips you have for people who haven't drafted yet?
Yeah, so this year especially, I've been going running back heavy. I think that's what most people are doing. I mean, the issue is running backs fly off the board, and those tiers, there's a wide margin between the first tier, the second tier, and then it really drops off after that. So I love my teams when I go running back, and I'm even fine to go running back again. There's been times where I haven't taken my first wide receiver until round 5, and I'm okay with that because you can grab a DJ Chark, you can grab a Terry McLaurin, you can grab an AJ Brown at the end of the 4th. So many great options that I'm fine as my wide receiver 1. Stack up on those wide receivers, like a lot of great ones in that area as you go along 5, 6, 7, those rounds. Michael Gallup's going in the 7th. I'll take him as my wide receiver 2. That's fine. Golden Tate is going in like the double-digit rounds. I do find if I take a quarterback early, I'm really disappointed in myself because I see what I missed out on. And then in the 11th round, someone will take a player like a Daniel Jones. And I'm like,
or Matt Ryan.
Yeah, Matt Ryan or Ben or even Gardner Minshew, like I said earlier in the 13th round. I'm like, I should have just waited. because I actually do enjoy streaming the quarterback position as well. It's just another thing that you can do, play against those good matchups. And that's kind of how I work with the tight ends as well. I just wait because, again, I could draft George Kittle. I'm missing out on a great running back, and it's not worth it for me.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you put it. It's not that the talent isn't exciting. It feels good to draft Patrick Mahomes. You're never going to be disappointed that you have him. It's the opportunity cost, and it's the guys you're looking, oh, do you want to have Patrick Mahomes and then you're having to put Chris Thompson as your RB2, or would you rather get Nick Chubb and Matt Ryan?
And people forget, so they think, well, Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson helped me win before, they'll help me win again. Well, you grabbed Lamar Jackson in the double-digit rounds last year. 2 years ago, you grabbed Patrick Mahomes in the double-digit rounds. Like, you can find these quarterbacks that late. Yes, you have to get lucky. You have to hit on them. But Josh Allen was also a double-digit round quarterback last year, and he helped you just fine. There's plenty of great quarterbacks you can find late. I'm not risking it early. If I did, it would be with Lamar Jackson over Patrick Mahomes, because that rushing floor just gives you such a safe, he's never ruining your week on any given week, and his ceiling is so high. So if I was going to get crazy and take one, it would be Lamar, but I'm going to wait.
I like it. For anybody out there, make sure you're checking out Michelle's work over at ballblastfootball.com, BallBlastFB, and you can find her at BallBlastem. Anything coming up here that you want the people to watch out for? And what is your normal cadence during the year? What kind of work are you putting out there as far as waiver wire pickups and recommendations?
Yeah, so we'll have articles drop every single day. We have a group of writers. They're pretty awesome. So you can find an article a day or a couple articles a day over on ballblastfootball.com. We have a group of 5 of us that own BallBlast Football with about 8 writers. So there's a bunch of content coming up on the site. We have a podcast called BallBlast, a fantasy football podcast. So we'll do 2 episodes a week. We'll talk about starts of the week, sits of the week, busts, all the normal stuff, but have some fun with it. And then we'll do a review of after each week as well. But you can find that over on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, really wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. For anybody out there, hopefully you enjoyed hearing where the Bills are going to slot in this year in fantasy. A little bit last minute cram session for any of those drafts coming up here. I know the Cover One Buffalo, our Slack channel, has a draft going on right now in another league tomorrow. So a couple of the guys listening here, I think were listening while they drafted. So looking forward to that. Oh, believe me, I'm sure he went way too early of where he should have been. And it's going to be exciting to see how things shake out. And it's fun that for the longest time, I've always been a Bills fan who never took Bills players, because anybody who did, it was as a homer on a wing and a prayer that they were going to somehow have some great season, and it never, ever worked. And this year, I'm not getting Bills players because other people are taking them before I can get them. And I'm not prepared for that. I'm not prepared for 2 running backs and 3 receivers and a quarterback to all get drafted. I'm just not ready to process that. The Bills defense is the only thing I keep ending up with.
Well, I hope my Steelers and your Bills meet in the playoffs.
I think it's very likely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michelle. This was a lot of fun. Thank you guys. You were great in the chat here. A lot of fun things to do. We had a quick thing here. Any other questions, Anuj? If you have anything, we'll be happy to answer it. But otherwise, send us in some things on Twitter. Again, you can find Michelle at BallBlast and find me at Greg Tompsett, GregTompsett. Going to be having a lot of fun this year, and hopefully this guy's got you set up right for the year. Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.